Hi everyone, I'm Lorraine Driscoll, and this is another episode of Building Better Brains, where each week I talk about the root causes of why your child might be having a hard time learning, reading, and behaving, and what are some solutions that reach way beyond the limitations of IEPs, medication, and endless tutoring. Speaking of tutoring, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. I want to address why tutoring problems and reading programs can fail, and what are some of the underlying factors with that can often have nothing to do with the tutor itself or the tutor being ineffective. So I wanted to start off first by telling you a conversation that I had with a mom about a year ago who saw very few results with her son, who had been in tutoring for about 2 years for reading, and he had made very, very minimal progress. And much to the mother's devastation, one of the results of this that she was not prepared for was that her son's self-esteem had taken a total nosedive. He, started constantly calling himself dumb, was really negative, very angry, and it was just a total nightmare for this poor mother. And the entire time we were talking, she kept telling me what she was trying to convince him by, telling me all the reasons why he was not dumb and how she had tried to convince him and what else she could do. Did I have any ideas of what I could do to make him realize he was not dumb? And finally I said to her, I think she was a little bit surprised at first. I said to her, can you blame him? Can you blame him for thinking that he is dumb? And she kind of looked at me like, are you calling my kid stupid? And I said to her, who wouldn't feel that way after 2 years of tutoring and making minimal gains? And, I explained to her that confidence and self-esteem comes from success. It comes from feeling, taking risks, and hopefully from those risks, we have more successes than failures. Failures are inevitable. But if every time we get on that horse and we fall off, if every single time that's happening and we never kind of go for a ride, then it's a pretty natural reaction, a response to feel very discouraged, to have low self-esteem, to think this isn't for me, there's something wrong with me, why can everybody else do this and not me? And I see this with tutoring. I don't want to say I see it all the time. I see it often enough where parents spend a lot of money, invest a lot of time driving to tutoring, and the child is progressing at a snail's pace, and as understandably so, the parents just continue because they don't know of any other what other options there are to improve their child's reading. And I want to be very clear, I'm not knocking tutoring. There are some phenomenal tutors and reading programs out there. But part of the problem why these phenomenal reading programs in tutoring can fail is because we are treating the symptom, we are not treating the cause. So my experience or my kind of aha moment when I started getting into educational therapy, having also had a background in holistic nutrition, I knew that part of the problem with kind of outdated conventional medicine is to just treat the symptom and kind of put a Band-Aid on it and not address why this illness or problem is happening in the first place. And I realized, man, we're really doing that also with the education system, where we're taking the medical model and we're applying that to learning and reading difficulties. We're addressing the symptom. So the symptom is this child is having a hard time reading, and we are not addressing the cause. And the longer I'm in educational therapy and nutrition, the more I'm seeing that the cause usually goes much further than trying to, do extra practice with instilling phonic sounds and blends and letter sounds and addressing letter reversals and so forth. It requires some serious detective work and experience and knowledge of the factors that can contribute to reading impairment that goes way beyond those typical phonic sounds and blends and so forth. And if we are just looking at the symptom, then we're going to say, oh, they need more reading, or, oh, they're not great in math, they need extra practice in math. And then we're totally missing the boat, and the child is missing out as well. We need to ask ourselves, why is my child not picking up like the other kids. Why is my child so many years behind? And totally, for some kids, extra practice, that's all they need, that's the solution. But for others, it is not. And it's not because it's hopeless. It's not because they have a low IQ or that they're dumb, as they refer to themselves, unfortunately. It's often because the brain is not ready. The brain is not fully developed, or doesn't have all the hardwiring, if you will, to be able to learn how to read, doesn't have the skills to process. And to me, trying to teach reading and these phonic sounds and all these other what these great reading programs can do, trying to do that when the brain is not ready is like you have a bucket, it has a small hole in it, and you're taking a whole lot of water and pouring it in that bucket, hoping that you keep that bucket mostly filled with water despite the fact that there's this small leak. And, you know, for sure the water for the most part is going to stay in, but you're not fixing the actual problem. You're managing it. And that is my whole gripe with IEPs. I'm 100% not against IEPs. They can be extremely purposeful and useful. They can even help to improve confidence and help kids understand, you know, what is going on so that there's no explanation of why they're having such a hard time. And accommodations and modifications can be great as well. But the goal, that is if the goal is to move the child, to hopefully get the child at the same level as their peers, if the goal with reading is reading mastery. And unfortunately, I rarely saw that whenever I was teaching, you know, for example, years ago I was teaching grade 7 language arts, and I so often saw kids who would have IEPs, and they had IEPs sometimes since grade 2 or grade 3, and they had not really improved or increased. They were still at the same reading level, or just maybe a year ahead of the reading level that they had got whenever they had received the IEP. And so we are managing it. You know, the kids might have even had good marks because their IEP has them reading, say, at a grade 4 level instead of a grade 7 level. You know, they're getting assistants and getting scribes and someone to read to them for the tests, the EQAOs, the literacy tests. So it looks really good, but at the end of the day, they're not actually reading. And I want to share with you, first of all, a common saying I hear in teaching. You've probably seen it. Maybe I see it more because of the algorithms on Facebook and who I follow and so forth. But the saying is that if a child cannot learn the way we teach, then we need to teach them the way they learn. And hands down, I agree with that 100%, but we need to make sure that the brain has strong connections before we do that. All the tips and tricks and trying to teach them the way they learn won't change or won't improve the situation if they have weak connections in the brain. So basically the bottom line is that tutoring fails, ultimately it fails, when the brain has weak connections, when the brain is not yet ready. And that can have nothing to do with a tutor. Certainly sometimes there's tutors who, you know, probably mean well and just don't have enough experience or knowledge or whatever what to do, and maybe a better tutor can make a difference. But there are lots of times when the best tutor in the world or the best reading program in the world is not going to produce the results that parents are hoping for. And if we're getting suboptimal results with tutoring, and this is going on for a while and we're not making progress, that means your child's brain is working way too hard to learn. They're working way too hard to read, to retain, to process, and so forth. And that is the same reason why one child has to work so much harder to be successful, or even to crack off a 72 or a 65 on a test or assignment, where another child doesn't have to put in all of that work. So when a child has to work that hard in order to learn, retain, or read, they have what is called blocked learning gates. So basically they have weak connections. And if we strengthen those areas of development in the brain, learning and reading becomes so much easier. It's not that, you know, learning and reading is going to be completely easy. We all know that learning something new can be frustrating, and that's really something schools and education people in education are trying to reiterate to kids, that it's not going to be quick and fast like we have with our video games and everything being quick and fast. But you know, there is a natural learning dip when we're learning something new. But if your child is not coming out of that learning dip like the other kids, and they're just falling further and further behind, that is more than a learning dip. There are some blocked learning gates. And so the right approach is to try to identify areas of the brain that are weak and underdeveloped. So you might be wondering, what are some of those things that can contribute to that? Well, things like retained primitive reflexes can hinder that. And if there are retained primitive reflexes, that basically means your child's baby brain is still on, if you will. Certain parts of it is still on, and that makes it really hard for the cortex to do its job and so forth. And if you want to learn more about that, you can hop onto my website. I have plenty of articles on that. And so when those primitive reflexes are retained, that is going to affect things like auditory and visual processing. And we all know that that's a huge component of reading difficulties like dyslexia. It can even impact things like focus, the ability to pay attention, and even impulsivity. And even things like eye tracking and eye teaming, so being able to follow a moving target so that they're not skipping lines or skipping words and so forth. And it can also impact their working memory. So the other factor that I want to address that parents are sometimes skeptical of with regards to why else tutoring is not working or as effective as parents had hoped it would be, is the impact of nutrition on the brain. And nowadays I don't find anybody is very surprised when you say, yes, diet can have a huge impact on ADHD. We even understand that diet can have a huge impact on mood and depression and even anxiety and so forth. But when we hear that diet can have a huge impact on dyslexia or reading difficulties, that's where we're kind of like, that sounds a little bit like pseudoscience and so forth, even though there's tons of research that dates back 30 and 40 years on the impact of critical nutrients on the brain, on the eyes, on the ears, on the effect on auditory processing, reading comprehension, eye tracking. There's studies by Dr. Jacqueline Storti, who pioneered all this, who saw significant improvements with her dyslexic and dyspraxic studies, if you will, when children received therapeutic amounts of nutrients, a therapeutic dose of key nutrients that are critical for the functions that are necessary for reading. So really, that's a whole other factor that you don't want to underestimate. And it doesn't mean that you're a horrible parent and your child's eating a horrible diet. Maybe everyone in the house could be eating the same diet, but your child has a different gut bacteria that's preventing them from absorbing and processing those nutrients. There's all kinds of biochemical reasons why they might be getting those nutrients, but the body's not able to utilize them effectively. And then there's the connection between the gut and the brain, the whole gut bacteria and yeast and bacterial overgrowth. And there's been tons of research on how this can impact auditory processing and cause impairments in auditory processing. There's tons of studies that have found links between auditory processing and the ear. So basically auditory processing and a high rate of ear infections whenever they're infants. And this isn't always the case, but that there is a much higher link with kids who have those difficulties. And so, when the eyes, the ears, and the brain is not being optimally nourished for whatever reason, how can we possibly expect them to work properly? How can we possibly expect a child to learn to read, to process well? And so if we want kids to achieve reading success, kids need 3 things in this order. They need a brain that's being optimally nourished, and that includes the gut, right? Because there's 100 billion neurons in your gut lining. That's your second brain. And they also need a well-organized brain with strong connections. They need to, all those primitive reflexes need to be integrated so that the cortex can do the higher order processes that it is meant to do. And once those factors are in place, then an intensive phonics-based program can be immensely helpful. But if those first 2 factors are not in place, that's when tutoring fails. So the bottom line is we want to make sure the brain is optimally nourished, that it's getting the nutrients it needs so that it can make those strong connections. Those connections are very biological. They are very physical and tangible material things, if you will, and they need to be made out of something. They need protein and fat and all kinds of micronutrients. And so if the brain is not getting those nutrients, it can't send the signals or build the connections that we're trying to do with those exercises. And so then how can we possibly expect the brain to, retain phonics or manage letter reversals if it's not able to build those connections because it's not getting what it needs? So if you found this video helpful, please share, and feel free to check out my Reading Rockstar Bootcamp at my website. I'll post that in the link in the comments below. And that program addresses the root cause of why your child's brain is working so hard to learn and to read. And what I do is I combine nutritional therapy with exercises that help to strengthen weak connections in the brain. And also, if you would like, feel free to message me, call me, or email to set up a free 20-minute consult to learn more about my program. Thanks for watching.